All right, everybody, welcome back to RCT Creations for an RCT Construction episode. We are back at Funland here in Sacramento, California, and we are working on the park's first B&M coaster. As you can see down there, it's June 18th, year 11. We are in the year of 2009, heading into February, so about time we get kicked off on the newest coaster for this park. If you've been keeping up with the series, you'd know that Fun Corporation has just recently purchased Royalty Cove, the zoo slash theme park, kind of a Busch Gardens-like park over in Jacksonville, Florida. So they've got a little bit going on in relation to the park, or the company itself. But we still have a pre-planned project for Funland here. So let's go ahead and get kicked off. So this is going to be a B&M dive coaster. So the first B&M coaster here at Funland. Kind of weird because Joyland went through its phase of B&M. They have two B&Ms over there. They have a stand-up and an invert. The first one opening in 93. The second one opening in, I believe it was 98. This is a pre-planned design. I'm just going to get that out of the way. But anyway, back on topic. So this is... so with Joyland getting a B&M invert, over here at Funland, they had it covered. They had their invert covered with Electric Eel, the Intimate Impulse. That kind of using that as their inverted coaster, kind of the same way Valley Fair uses Steel Venom as their invert. And then they had the stand-up coaster covered with The Last Stand, which actually operated right here. And in fact, most of the base support structure is still there for its unique design. However, it is now time to replace that. I don't know why height marks did not show up, but we got it right. We're good. So we're going to start right here with the turn back into the station, which is going to be right here. And as I did mention, this is a pre-built design, so I have a design park open in the background, and we're kind of copying the design over into this park right here. So I actually want to use a booster right here, which is not selected, so I'll have to enable all drawable track pieces and start again. There we go. So the reason I use boosters on these rides is just to kind of keep the trains moving as much as possible. I don't want to use too many of them and just kind of use them to keep the train moving at a slow pace so it doesn't slow down, because it will slow down eventually. As far as color scheme goes, we're going to go with the black and purple supports because it is going to share a theme with another coaster within the chain. And I'll kind of reveal that closer to as we start getting the ride put together here. But if you can think of a coaster with a similar color scheme, you are probably on the right track here. We're going to go ahead and set up our block break here. So we have our backup block. We're going to put another booster in right here, and this is going to lead into our station, which will be 3 tiles long. And then on the back side here, we're going to go ahead and set up a couple of breaks right here as well. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, okay. So I want to make sure I have the speeds correct. So with the ability to set the block brakes to faster speeds, this allows the train to kind of pull through faster. So we're going to set those to 9, and then we'll set that one to 13. And then we're going to go up in height, because these B&M dive coasters typically have a slanted brake run. Unfortunately, in OpenRCT2, they haven't ported over the slope brake runs for the B&M coasters yet. I think it will come eventually, but they've been adding so much good stuff to this game to this point. Not quite there yet, but it will get there. And then we'll do a set of brakes up here. And I believe, gotta remember what the brakes, but I believe it was set to slow as much as we possibly can. So let's go. So I'm trying to think at the top of my head what I set these brakes to. I can't remember. It's been a while since I built the design for this coaster. We'll go with 9 for the time being, but we have, I believe, a 5 tile. So it's a 6 tile break, 5 tile break one. Okay. So yeah, we'll set this one to 9 and then go up from there. And then there's our 5 tile break run. So this is the end of the ride, and I will actually set up the final little bit as well here. So right before the brake run, we have a slope that ends at 55 feet in height. So that is basically the end of the ride. And then in the meantime, let's go ahead and get rid of all the last stand support structure here and kind of get this terrain sort it out a little bit. I want to get rid of the trees on this side of the railroad just so for heavy equipment to move through, they have the ability to do that. And then we'll go ahead and set that right there. As far as the initial start of the ride, we will have a booster section out of the station, again set to 4 miles an hour, not horribly fast because I don't want to shoot the train out of the station, but just to make sure. I mean, it's a visual, and then it also has the practical effect. It's more meant to mimic drive tires. We have one booster, one straight, or one standard piece, and then we're going to head into our lift hill, which is going through the steep one. Now, this is one of the rides that I was kind of nervous about to build because I tend to use a lot of vanilla scenery, as you are all aware if you followed this series and followed my channel. And unfortunately, there's really no good vertical lift hill support pieces in the game. So I had to get a little creative, and we'll get there when we get to the fitting out process. But once we get to the top, we're going to go to 160 feet. We're going to do one more vertical piece, then we're going to do our right-hand turn. We're going to do one more. We're going to do actually not one more straight piece. We're going to do a brake here to slow the train down as it approaches the hold brake, which will be right there. Now beyond that, we're going to do a little bit of terrain manipulation below us here. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of this terrain down here as well and just kind of switch it back because we want to kind of get rid of as much as we can, and then some of this will be done again in the fitting process. And we'll go with that for now. We're going to go into our vertical drop, which is going to go down to, I believe, minus 30 feet, which is definitely going to end up underneath the sky ride here. So we get to 35, we're going to start to flatten out if we can. I see what I did. So we're going to 35, and then that's going to go to 20. Then we have a vertical piece, and then we're going to have our spot that flattens out. And to do that, we're going to need to get a little bit creative with our terrain work here. I'm almost going to need to use the cutaway view. Select area. There we go. So let's go with that. And we want this to be kind of flat, so it's going to look kind of strange in the meantime, just because it's not going to have the So there we go. There is our track piece there. That takes us to our minus 30. And if I'm not mistaken, one, two, three, four, five. So we have 5 straight pieces before we start to pull back up. And then we're going to pull back up here. And then what I'm going to put down here as well is our on-ride photo section, because we definitely want one of those for this ride. So we're going to work our way back up and out of the tunnel. And I used a lot of, if you watch the Iron Horse RCT construction episode from this park, you'll kind of get the inspiration for this tunnel look here. And this is going to go all the way back up to the 0 height. Like that, and then we will start building back up. So now we can go ahead and get away from the cutaway view. And we are now working our way back up. So now we're back on natural terrain here. So when I was originally doing the concept in the design world or the design park, I guess, I'm not necessarily using the actual design world park that I have, but I am using a design park. If you do want to kind of like plan out your coasters, I would definitely suggest doing something like this. Just kind of, you can get a feel for how the ride will fit in your park, and that's not always something that's really easy to get from RCT sometimes. So we're gonna go ahead and go back up, and then this is taken straight from Arrival. This is something I came up with for that ride, and I think I've seen others do this as well. But it looks kind of funky. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do, but it does work. So we're gonna do a quarter loop like that. So it kind of like is jarring looking at it this way. But if you just do the large half loop, you can't get up very high without it looking kind of bizarre as well. So I started doing this for the big Immelmans, and I think it works okay. It's not my favorite looking element, but it does the job and does it reasonably well. And then I could do the 0G roll as well. However, I think with the sprites still not quite there, I did just roll with the with kind of my standard, and then it's dive loop that it would be. So it'd be dive loop right. So this is something you could potentially do. I think this looks okay. If you use the 4 across seating, I think the sprites do look okay. However, with the 8 across trains, I think it tends to look a little bit jarring. So I'm just going to go with kind of the standard one I did for Arrival, which would be the barrel roll into the steep drop, which leads into the curve right here. And then that's going to level back out just like that. So I think that looks okay as well. I'll leave it up to you if you end up doing a ride like this. I guess we'll leave it up to you. That sounds kind of pretentious. But however you want to do it when you build these dive coasters, I personally think this looks the best. At least for the time being. If we can get, in some of these custom trains, if they had the sprites to do the other rolls, that's what I would like to do. But for the meantime, I think this does the job just fine. Okay. Now beyond that, we have a 1 space here, and then we're gonna avoid going and messing with the train anymore, so we're immediately gonna start rising back up. Whoopsies. So we're immediately gonna start rising back up, and at 35 feet, we're gonna bank to the left. I'm gonna do 1 more extra set of banking, and we're gonna go out. 1 more extra set of banking, out. And this is going to go up to 85 feet. Then we'll level off. And then bank back towards Electric Eel. And then beyond that, we're going to do this little bit of an airtime drop here. So you're going to go over this curve and then drop down. And we're just going to do a flat level out here. And then immediately bank and start heading back home. So this is a very short dive coaster. I'd say if there was any dive coaster that inspired me to build this one, it would be Crake at Heide Park. And that is where a lot of the inspiration for this coaster comes from. And then we're going to go up to 55 feet. And then we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to use the barrel roll pieces. And that will get us lined up. And again, I would use the newer 0G roll or dive loop pieces. However, with these sprites for these particular trains, they don't have the sprites to go through those new inversions without having a jarring spot. Like the train will just jolt by the like, and it's a personal thing. It's not even necessarily that I think it looks terrible. I think it just looks very jarring, and I tend to avoid doing that. And it's the same reason, like, and you see a curve like this, I will avoid doing that just because that transition looks really jarring. If I'm doing an arrow looper, I might do that because that might be something you'd expect. However, with the B&Ms, I tend to kind of level out and then over, which still kind of looks arrow-like, but with the constraints of the game, you do what you can. Okay, so there is our layout for our brand new coaster, and we will go ahead and jump on over into the fitting out process. All right, and jumping into the fitting out process for this particular ride. A little bit of landscaping down below the station, again using the reference I created in the design park. I think I covered this. It's been a little bit since I recorded the live com portion of this. Actually recorded that in a different state. I'm halfway across the country now, and now we're doing it back from my original home. So this has definitely been an interesting interesting transition, and I'm curious to see if I can remember what I talked about in the live comp portion. So I apologize if I end up repeating anything here. So again, landscaping based off the design park, and I believe I mentioned it in the live comp portion. When I go to build new coasters, now it's a little bit different for the Fun Corporation. I will copy the original park, which I did for this one, and then build one or two designs just to kind of see what works and what doesn't with the landscape below. The Immelman on this ride got worked on a couple times, so it was actually originally in a different spot, but I ended up moving it to where it is now. But yeah, go ahead and working on the transfer track. Again, all based off the design part, because I wanted to see what I needed to do to the land below it to get it to fit. I didn't finish the station in the design park. However, I gave myself a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do. Moving on into kind of the lift structure. So really, I didn't want to do the truss style, but at the end of the day, this is something that I had used before. The Arrival dive coaster at my World of Remnant park has kind of this truss style, which I think looks good. Is it something B&M would do in real life? Probably not, unless you ask them to. There is, I believe, one example. I think there is only one example of B&M using the truss style, and it is on Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, just to kind of make the lift hill for that ride look more like a ski lift to fit the theme for the ride. But on this one, it really wouldn't make a difference. Ideally, I would have done the more custom supports like I'm doing right here. And fun fact, this is the first coaster in the series to feature full custom supports for the most part. I think there's a couple in the trench that I left. There's actually one I forgot to put on this one, the one at the bottom of the drop, which is going to be in the POV, but is not in the construction. Because every once in a while, I'll build the supports and then go, oh crap, I forgot one. So I had to go back and re-add it. But only the second ever full custom support ride I've ever done. I think the first one being, again, at the World of Remnant Park, I believe I called it Downfall. It was the wing coaster there. This was also kind of a process with the station. I ended up redesigning the way I was going to do the exit path. I wanted to do a gift shop inside the station building, and I ended up doing it a way I had done a long time ago. I had a park series, and maybe at some point I'll showcase them, but it's coaster designs I'm not necessarily proud of anymore. It was just basically built in a super flat world, if you're using Minecraft terms, but I think most people understand that. But it's just a flat world. I ended up calling it Grand Texas. There was supposed to be a park opening in Houston called Grand Texas, and I think the project stalled, never got finished. But I used to do gift shops inside kind of the exit path, and there would just be a t-shirt stall, a balloon stall, maybe a hat stall, only on the exit path, and it ended up being blocked by a no entry sign. But I ended up doing that for this particular ride. And we'll come back to that. Moving on, we're starting to get the drop tunnel kind of realized, and this is the second time I kind of figured out where to put this. I ended up being really happy with the way it turned out, and all these tunnels ended up based off of the one I did for Iron Horse. Iron Horse at this park was the first coaster where I didn't do just necessarily an underground tunnel. I actually did dug a trench and then used scenery to cover it, and I think at the end of the day it ends up looking absolutely beautiful. Now this piece is something I didn't do in the design world either, and it looks okay, I think. With this ride being kind of the spin-off of Kingman at Joyland, this one ended up being called Kingman's Grave. So the theme for it is, the medieval town. I don't think town's the word I'm looking for, but it's the only one that's coming to mind. The medieval village, that's it. The Kingman gets overthrown and ends up kind of falling the village into ruins. I didn't do a very good job of making a ruined village. I just kind of did the castle. It was supposed to kind of look worn down and broken down, but end of the day, maybe they elected somebody new. Elected, or I don't know how kings rise to power, unfortunately. It depends on which civilization you're talking about, I guess. But so you have the big gravestone right there is what that's supposed to be. Does it do a good job of looking like a gravestone? Not really, but at the end of the day, that's what it's supposed to be. So if you watch the POV and watch this later, that's what that is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a gravestone. So you drop off the vertical drop into underneath the gravestone into basically the grave, which gives the ride its name, Kingman the Grave. Again, a lot more custom support work here. I'm really bad at custom supports. The ones that are here, I think, look okay. I misplaced some of them and have to go back and redo them. I really dislike it when I do custom supports and I think, oh, this looks really good. Then you hit the turn your camera 45 degrees and then you realize, oh, they're not even close. They're either like 30 tiles too high, 30 tiles to the left, 30 tiles off. It's just, that frustrates me and you have to go back and redo it. So you're probably going to notice some of that there that I had to go back and redo. And some of them I ended up coming back and redoing because I had to split this let's build this RCTContruction into a couple different segments. So you might notice a fade and then a fade back in because I had to pause, go do something, and come back to it. Anyway, custom supports here. Another thing I'm not a big fan of with the custom support work on this ride in particular, and I probably could have done a little bit better. With B&M supports, when you angle off like that, the angle looks good when it comes down. However, if you notice, it goes from that angle to a vertical spot before it gets to the footer. That's not something B&M would do. It would just be at an angle until it hit the ground. However, with the custom support pieces that are on offer that I have downloaded, I really don't have anything that could have kept it going to match up. Gerstlauer is known to do some stuff like that where you'll start off at an angle and then it'll go vertical before it hits the footer. B&Ms typically don't do that, so that's one thing that kind of annoys me with the way the custom supports ended up working. However, and I've said it before, when I do custom supports, at some point I just kind of like get tired of it and just whatever works, and that's kind of the story here. Oh, that one support right there just looks terrible, I think. But the ride itself ended up working out pretty well, I think. Just for a short layout style B&M, and then the one big support sticking up in the middle of the truss supports probably also could have done that a little bit better. It probably would have looked better had I just done truss the entire way. But one of my favorite things with the B&M dives, and Tormenta is such a good example of it, is just the one vertical support piece that sticks up off the curb off the curve at the top. And so just to see that go like 300 feet down, it's pretty funny. Valraven has it. Yukon Striker has it. I believe all the big dive coasters have the one vertical support that has no connections that just goes straight down, which I always find kind of funny. These supports ended up looking pretty good. You see the angled column goes all the way to the footer. I think those ones look great. That's based off of Crake, and there's an example where they were not aligned. But I think having the angle go off the side of the inversion ended up looking pretty good. And now we're going to get back to that station work. Just finishing off the floor, we got the transfer segment in there. We have 3 transfer tracks with the B&M coasters in 90% of cases. B&M has a transfer for every single train that can run on the ride. In the case of a ride like this, is 3 trains really necessary? No. Crake at Haida Park, the ride this is based off of, actually does run 3 trains. For a short B&M dive coaster, are 3 trains really necessary? Probably not. I think for the first 2 years, Kingman's Grave will probably run the 2 trains. Then in 2011 or so, we'll switch to only running 2. However, your benefit is you have 3 trains available. So especially at a year-round park like Funland is, you can constantly have 1 out of service to get rebuilt while you have 2 on the track at all times. I think 2 train ops on a ride like this would ideally be perfect. I don't think there's really anything you would want to do other than that. 1 train on the B&M dives can get a little sluggish, so I think a 2 train operation is the ideal way to run through that. So getting a little bit of castle wall here, so not quite like Joyland where we're going to completely section off this area. One thing I do like about the area that Last Stand was in and that this ride also takes up, the hill underneath, the terrain underneath just looks really good to put a bridge over. You have those 2 small ponds down there in the valley that I think end up looking really good. So what I ended up doing is building this castle wall around here and then just hiding the queue behind it so you can't see how long the line is really from over there. But even still, with this queue house full, I believe the maximum wait time wasn't even a half hour. I think it was 25 minutes. Especially when running 3 trains, 24 passengers per train with the 8 across, 3-car trains. This ride's a people eater, especially when it runs 3. And that's the big thing about the B&Ms, and that's why I'm so excited to have a B&M coaster over here at Funland finally. It's kind of an odd pairing, and this is, again, the reason this is the first B&M at this park, in the RCT3 versions, which after the series is complete, I will end up showcasing. And just to give you a bit of a spoiler warning, they're not good parks, especially by Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 standards. Maybe at some point I should visit an RCT 3 park. Let me know if you're interested in that in the comments. I would give that game a shot, even though it doesn't have the open RCT 2 mechanics, which are really rough. That RCT 3 has some really weird quirks. But anyway, back to the queue length. I think that's about perfect. It hides through high capacity coaster, and with this being the first B&M, we want a high capacity ride because Funland is very busy. Following up the first cut, we're starting to put together a little bit more of the station. Just getting the walls in place. Inside is going to be pretty bare outside of the transfer tracks, and then where the transfer tracks are is going to be pretty empty. Inside these transfer sheds, you typically have a lot of tools, a lot of parts, a lot of extra wheels. The B&M transfer sheds typically do not have floors next to them. If you look at one of them, if you're close to a B&M coaster, go take a look. Is Valraven's kind of the best example I can give. Below Valraven's transfers, you have a space underneath where you can access the wheel bogies a lot easier. There's wheels on the B&M transfer sheds that hold the train up by the... I'm trying to think of the best term for it. It's basically... I can't think of the term off the top of my head, but it's where the brake section is on the train. And it's just held up. It's kind of where the ARB and then the chain dog is, and it's what the drive tires will grab a hold of to push the train. But they have wheels that the train sits on so that the actual running wheels, the guide wheels, and upstops don't get excess wear because they're constantly sitting. If you leave a train sitting on the actual urethane wheels, they will develop flat spots, and as a rider, you can feel those. It's very, very interesting. And B&M does a really good job at setting up their trains to last and their wheels to last. There's a video somewhere, I think it was put out by Theme Park Worldwide when Valkyria opened at Liseberg, and there was a figure floated out for how much an individual road wheel was for these B&M dives, and it was crazy expensive. So you really want to make sure that you take care of these rides while you want to make sure you take care of the parts you've got, because replacing them, not very easy. Moving on over here, we're going to connect Aquatica to Kings Isle. So for the first time ever in Funland history, you'll have another way to get back to Minetown. So it's no longer just a singular path that went underneath Ring of Fire's loop. Now you have two different ways to get back towards Minetown, which I think actually is a huge benefit to this particular park. Now just kind of working on the overlay that I kind of talked about earlier, where we have, just a bridge that the paths go over. A little bit of theming will go down there, but not a whole lot. Gonna end up doing a King's Feast like we have over at Joyland as well, with candy apples and then lemonade. So it kind of fits and these two stalls fit the aesthetic pretty well, but we're gonna put a pretty basic building around them just so they have a little bit of extra. One thing I did not add that I should have is a back path with a door for employee access, but maybe at some point I'll add this building just to kind of add a little bit more detail. But for the most part, it's done. You just go in through the front, I guess. With that done, we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of seating as well, so guests can go watch the first drop from over here in this corner. But again, a nice elevated area. I really like the way the land underneath there works, and getting rid of last stand to kind of open this up and give a nice view for guests, and a nice little walking path on a bridge above it, I think worked out really, really well. All in all, the Kings Isle area here at Funland came together pretty darn well, and I don't have any complaints at all for how it ended up looking. I think it works really well. The building, very square, but you guys know me, that's my building style. And then the actual castle itself, I think looks much better than Kingman at Joyland, because that building's very basic. This one has a little bit more tower structure, a little bit more depth and height, which I think helps quite immensely. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and get the staff hired and thrown in there to make sure that they have full coverage over there. But at the end of the day, that is the completion for Kingman. We're going to go ahead and do the test runs for the ride. And while we do that, let me go ahead and pull up the final stats for it. So Kingman's Grave, ends up having an excitement rating of 8.13, intensity of 7.67, and a nausea of 3.74. So ends up being the highest excitement rating ride in the park, beating out Xenon 200 by 0.12 in terms of excitement, which is really, really cool. Has a pretty high intensity rating, but not much more to expect from these B&M dive coasters. Final height 170 feet makes it the third tallest in the park behind Electric Eel and Xenon 200. Top speed of 77 miles an hour, making it the second fastest in the park, and then a track length of 2,667 feet. Regardless, thank you guys for tuning in for this RCT construction, finishing up with a couple detail work with the restricted area fences around some of the low to the ground segments. But this has been RCT Creations. Again, if you're watching this, I really do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks a lot.